George P. Wakefield, 1910 to 2001. George Patterson Wakefield was born in Vermilion, Ohio, the son of Frederick William Wakefield and Mary Poley. He graduated from Vermilion High School in 1928 and attended Finn Engineering School, Cleveland, 1930 to 1932, and Ohio University in 1933. Mr. Wakefield retired in 1970 as chief engineer after 38 years of service with the F.W. Wakefield Brass Company in Vermilion. He held 18 lighting patents for the company, 4 private patents. He also had a career as a columnist and local historian. He was a columnist and poet for the Vermilion News, 1938 to 1964, and columnist for the Vermilion Photojournal, 1988 to 2001. His awards for writing include the Anchor Award from the Vermilion Chamber of Commerce for covering Vermilion history and the Great Lakes Fisherman's Tug Award for adding to the fishing history of Lake Erie. The following clips are from his Vermilion views in the Photojournal. Walpers were a prominent Vermilion family of many talents. The Walpers were a large and prominent family living in Vermilion during the first part of the 20th century. I recall 3 of them when I observed the locals in the 20s. The first one was Adam Walper, who worked at the brass works as a carpenter. In those years, lighting fixtures were shipped in wooden boxes packed with straw. Adam made the boxes and packed many of the fixtures. This all ended when the Hind and Dosch paper in Sandusky developed the paper corrugated box, which revolutionized the packing business. Adam retired with the wooden boxes. Henry Walper became a lake captain and sailed for many years. He lived at the southwest corner of South and Exchange Street. John Walper was the Standard Oil man in the Vermilion area. He kept his team across the nickel plate tracks where the Standard Oil Company had storage tanks and a barn. John lived just north of the State Street School in the house still standing. This fine picture of John and his team and wagon taken by Pearl Roscoe is a prize winner, for it shows the oil delivery system in great detail. My memory of this outfit is vivid even though I was not a horse lover. It came from watching John deliver gasoline to yachts in the river. In those days, there was no Don Parsons gas station on the creek pumping gas through a hose, but gas was delivered 10 gallons at a time, carried from the tank to the boat and poured in by John. Each time he filled a can, he moved a pointer to the next 10 gallons on a dial, thus keeping a perfect record of gallons delivered. His team consisted of 2 white horses, Bill and Bob, and John kept them like pets. The photo shows the harness detail so well that I had to consult the dictionary to sharpen up my knowledge of the terms so common in those years. For instance, there is a crown, piece, a girth, a trace buckle, and a dozen other terms unknown to this marine man. Gosh, what a job hooking a team up to a wagon. Yet this was common back in the horse age. A lot of hard work hooking up and unhooking every day. No wonder autos were in great demand. John and his team left memories around town. His reliability, his good oil, and the team with Bill and Bob carting the heavy wagon through the village. Memories impressed from crunching steel rims as the wheels rolled on through the years. John and his rig were part of Vermilion's history, and this photo brings it all back to us 80 years later. Thanks to Al Tarrant and John Fisher for the photo. Steam pumper is first local fire engine. The first steam pumper owned by the Vermilion Volunteer Fire Department in 1885. Here is a fine picture taken by Pearl Roscoe around 1900. Let me interpret this engine in a mechanical manner to describe its functional design, for it is a forgotten piece of steam power history. This horse-drawn vehicle represented the latest in fire engines during the pre-gasoline engine age. It is a Silby steam pumper. I do not know where it was made, for I haven't seen any reference book describing it or the manufacturer. Perhaps friends at the Ritter can give me a tip. At any rate, here is my description based upon the photo and my lifelong interest in the subject. Starting at the boiler in the back of the contraption, we have a vertical boiler with water tube copper coils, much like those old gas water heaters. The design produced fast steaming, so such boilers were called flash boilers. The old Stanley steamer cars used the same design. Running forward is a long crankshaft for the steam engine and the pumper, both being piston types. The round shining shields are oil guards at the cranks. The bulbous brass ball behind the driver is an expansion chamber to equalize the flow at the hose nozzle. That round object below the steam engine must be an auxiliary water tank that fed water to the boiler through an injector shown nearby. When the photo was taken, the safety valve is blowing, so she is ready to go. When the steam engine is running and the pump is working on water, the exhaust through the stack produces that wondrous sound so typical of steam threshers. There you have it, according to this steam buff, all about steam fire engines. The firemen in the picture are easily identified, for I knew them all. George Crop, the cat fisherman, sits ready to go in the driver's seat. Dad Tisher, the old chief of many years, stands next to the boiler. Lou Blattner, the tin smith, is next, while Henry Schmuel, the street commissioner, is at the edge of the picture. The small lad must be Harvey Crop watching his dad. The fellow behind the engine is unknown because he is invisible except for his legs. What a nice photo. Thanks to Albert Tarrant and John Fisher for dropping it off at the Vermilion Photojournal. I had a ball just looking at the details of a real steam pumper. Early fire bells rang for many devastating local blazes. The fast-ringing fire bell at the fire station not only alarmed the populace and the firemen, but caused fright among us kids in the 20s. We had memories of scary local fires in those years that were big ones, and each linger in my mind to this day from the drama they created. And if they occurred in the darkness of the night, greater fear of fire among the kidders developed. Among the famous conflagrations I recall was Rumsey's barn fire, which stood just north of the Catholic school. A fine team of horses met their fate then, which was a gory and sad happening. Wasn't there a fire in the story of Black Beauty, a horse-age popular children's book I faintly remember? Then the Methodist Episcopal Church burned soon after. It stood where Glen Fulper Station is today. It was an empty building then, so it lay dormant and unused except as a basketball court, but for many years it was a prominent church meeting place for the pioneer families in town. Around that time, Ed Lamp's Southwest Fish House burned to the ground in a fiery ending. He later rebuilt his famous round ice house, perhaps the one and only in the nation. Then came the big brass works blaze of 24, which caused quite a disturbance in the community, for it pertained to a potential loss of employment. I believe this also eliminated the old horse hook and ladder fire engine and brought forth the gas fire engines. I remember seeing the old rig wait for the team before it took off to fight a fire. The mill fire, which stood where the rest home is today, was a big dramatic night fire. Then there was the Fisher lumber fire of the 30s, a devastating event of the loss of lovely, stored wood, where beautiful white pine planks from northern Michigan that came down on the Fisher schooner barges and lumber hookers. Luckily, the Fisher mansion was only scorched on the east side. The Leidheiser Fish Company fire was a big one that toasted a few boats stored at the Moe's yard. The Baker Ford garage at the northwest corner of Liberty and Grand was a bright night blaze which went up fast from oil-soaked floors. I took some photos of the remains, which was my first recorded event snapped in the heat of the hoses. Yes, we have had our share of destructive fires, but with few deaths over the years thanks to our present modern equipment, and Chief Crop's stalwart and quick volunteers. The chief told me fires aren't nearly as prominent as they were thanks to the present system, education, and alarming devices. That's progress. The accompanying photo is a dandy of the 1917 Model T fire engine with the crew scattered around the engine in a serious pose. There is Roy Hulbert sitting at the right, an unknown, then Carl Blaser, Vern Leidheiser with his smile, a face I recall but can't name, and an unknown sitting on the stern. On the upper deck looks like a Kishman standing, Sheeny Tischer is next, and at the front seat is George Leidheiser and Lou Blattner at the steering wheel. This unit was the first gasoline-driven fire engine and was known as a chemical truck with two water tanks activated by an acid bottle broken inside, which provided the force and extinguishing liquid to quiet the blaze. Modern in its time, this unit replaced the old steam age. Nothing today, though, can top the thrill to the kids like the old fast ringing tempo of Vermilion's early fire bell, to the tintinnabulation that so musically wells from the bells, bells, bells. Hart's Corner Drugstore Memories. Jim Hart dropped off this local history of his old store, which provides us with an interesting story about a building and business we natives have known for a long time. The original property was sold by Eli S. Barnum, George G. Baker, and Nathan G. Sherman as trustees for properties of Vermilion Township on April 1, 1840. The records are in Huron County, Ohio. A Masonic Lodge building was built in 1868 and destroyed by fire in 1870. Gaylord and Merrill built the present building in 1870. The building housed many businesses including the post office, the Goodsell Company, the Wagner Shoe Shop, and the Miller Saloon. Albert H. Hart bought the property in June 1920 from John E. Stang of Sandusky, Ohio. It was known as the Warner property and identified as Lots 72, 73, and 74. The warranty deed is dated November 3, 1920. Mr. Hart went into business August 2, 1912, when he bought from Hubert H. White a drugstore located in the Crop and Goodsell building. The location is presently Lee Shattuck's Landing. After buying the building on the northwest corner of Liberty and Main, he put in central heating, took out the wall in the center of the room, and put in a new front. The work was done by David Miller of Vermilion. When the building was ready, he moved his drugstore. The second floor was used by the Masonic Lodge and the Vermilion Boat Club. Dr. Norman T. Anderson, DDS, occupied the front rooms for his dental practice from November 1950 to October 1961. Dr. Carl Roth was there before Dr. Anderson. Mr. Louis Stoffel, CPA, had his accounting office north of the dental rooms. Mitzi Braun also had her beauty shop in the north end of the building. R. E. Warner Engineering Company had its start in Mr. Stoffel's area after he left. Second photo courtesy of Vermilion History Museum. Paddle Wheeler cruises river. Cruising down the river on a Sunday afternoon was an adventure in 1914 when aboard Frank Moe's paddle wheel boat, as shown here in Pearl Roscoe's snapshot. The boat is just approaching the Lake Shore Electric Bridge near the Southwest Fish Company. Today, opposite the Ball Tower, otherwise called the Golf Ball of the Gods, by romantic dreamers. So now you know where Frank Moe's paddle wheeler was one Sunday afternoon a long time ago. In those years, besides enjoying the thrill of bang, bangs, and chugs of the stationary gas engine driving the paddles, about all the passengers would see along the river docks were steam fish tugs to port and the vast marsh on the starboard side, as the echoes of the bang, bangs, and chugs drove the ship downstream. Note the passengers all lined up neatly on the seat provided, and Frank sitting at attention alongside of his pet banger. Their costumes, and especially their hats, look like 1914 to me. But isn't this a photo of the past with the lakeshore electric bridge that is gone, representing a mode of modern travel in its day, trap nets on the dock of a trade, gone with the wind, and a paddle wheel boat, a slice of Mark Twain's romantic river yarns? You can't get much more nostalgic in one shot than that. The interesting detail of Frank's boat requires a few lines. The engine is a stationary one that followed steam tractors as a power source for grinding grain, pumping water, and 1,000 other chores that required power. Those engines were made in the United States and shipped all over the world. They were a wonderful assist to the myriad of jobs everywhere. Their characteristic exhaust, bark, was heard in the jungles of Africa and the rice paddies of China, every place on Earth chugging away like robots. Perhaps the most unappreciated and unacknowledged power source we ever knew. Such are the ironies of power. We don't realize what a good thing we have when we have it. Frank Moe's paddle wheel boat never won a prize for speed or maneuverability, but she was the major attraction on the Vermilion River a long time ago. And one never forgot her distinctive bangs, and chugs. Thanks to Al Tarrant and John Fisher for the photo, and thank you to Tom Mose for providing the second photo. Recalling Grand Street Grocer brings back the good old days. Grand was a secondary street to Liberty in Maine, but it did have several worthy stores that should be described. First, we have Simon's Grocery on the west side. Here was a store of the 1880s full of familiar aromas and foods. At the entrance was the candy case on the right, and other cases on both sides. Shelves in the back wall displayed canned goods and every other item in the store. In front, on the floor, were the square tin boxes of a variety of cookies that had glass fronts for display. In the center back was Mrs. Simon's pulpit, where she reigned supreme as the price guardian and cashier. Her word was final. I believe the meat market was back of her stand. Mr. Simons was clerk and filled orders taken over the phone. It was an efficient family business so typical of the days. The photo on the left is Sid Simon with his parrot Polly. Now the delivery team was something. It consisted of the Model T Ford van, Court Simons, and George Showalter. This team would go all over town delivering call-in orders in the morning and afternoon. It was too good of a service, and now gone with the wind. But that was the service offered in those days. I guess that is why some of the customers wished for the good old days again. Simon's was a piece of the 1880s and an artifact on Grand Street. It had the best candy case, the best butterscotch rolls, the aroma as you entered, and the best delivery team in town. Grand Street may have been a secondary street, but it had its loyal customers. Mary Baldridge used to tell of her being sent to Simon's early on a Saturday morning to buy some butterscotch rolls for breakfast at Florence Parsons' house in the good old summertime. Those were the days. Axtell Sawmill was humming during the Big Woods age. Amos Feisley, my 1928 VHS classmate, dropped off two interesting snapshots of a sawmill and teamsters hauling logs that provide a column for this week's views. Let's see what kind of a story they inspire. The sawmill is a typical one of the steam age period in the country, a vertical boiler, a steam engine driving the rotary saw, housed in a rough sawn shed with a lone stack. Giant logs piled helter-skelter in the yard waiting to be cut to market-size boards. Used rough sawn as in the building itself. Nothing fancy like planing in those days, apparently by these township operations. Note the ready horses in the foreground just waiting for a log pull. Then there is the big wheel log hauler used to lift a log end and cart it around by the team. This operation is much the same today except for the steam power, the horses, and the large diameter logs. The timber in the years of this photo crica 1910 was from virgin trees, sometimes called Indian wood, trees reaching skyward as much as 125 feet, left over from the shipbuilding dynasty. I recall the big tree age, once when I went squirrel hunting with Dad. It was in the big woods, back of the Bristol farm on State Street, near the bend south of the Mason Road corner. Father shot a squirrel, way up high, and it came tumbling down, which registered on my mind as a lingering memory of the tree heights. The Big Woods was located between Mason Road and Route 113 and State Road and Harrison Road. I often heard Pete Derby, while getting my hair cut, tell about his hunts in the Big One. Those yarns were so good that old Judge Blanchard would halt his story to listen. Pete and the Derby boys were regular Daniel Boones and knew all the woods around their house on Darrow Road for night or day hunting. The big woods are a thing of the past today. Only the third growth stand alone, somewhat diminished in the area. But the virginal forests were a thrilling and dramatic stage in those Indian days, and it is hard to imagine that those big trees were everywhere, and you walked through them in their shadows on the brightest days. The two teams hauling snow sleds loaded with big timber show the size of the trees quite well. The first teamster is our old friend Billy Miller, easily recognized by his stature. He lived in the big house, across from the Catholic school on Ohio Street. His barn had a golden horse on the front, indicating that horses were his business. The fellow in the rear may be Myron Frisbee. He has a double team. If you look closely, it appears that they are just south of the bend on State Street south of Axtell. The house in the photo looks familiar, but with renovations and destructions changing the landmarks over the years, I can't isolate this spot on the road. Perhaps some of my readers can help. What wondrous tales a photo tells are linked to the past in the local scenario. Amos told me his two brothers remembered the sawmill as they walked by going to the school at Axtell. Amos doesn't recall it, so this seems to indicate the year of 1910 as an approximate date. The mill stood north of the cheese factory in Axtell, the only brick building there. Swiss Cheese Factory once marked the four corners of Axtell. Axtell? Where oh where? Did you get that name? I have often wondered as I passed by on State Road on my way to Birmingham. And I knew that the brick building there was once a cheese factory, but with this photo from Pearl Roscoe's Greyflex, maybe, I now have the complete story about local Swiss cheese, that delicacy that almost challenges Perky Perch. As for the name, I find it is rare among American town names. There is one in Nebraska and one in Kansas, both spelled Axtell. Maybe our Axtell was misspelled. Anyone knowing the source of Axtell or Axtell among my gentle readers, please give me a ring on this important subject. Incidentally, this crossing of Mason and State Road was originally called Wells Corners. Mr. Wells, an early settler, owned most of the land around the corner. He also prospered with a general store there. So, this wooden building shown in the photo stood just north of the current brick building, and it was the Diamond Cheese Company, manufacturer of fancy Swiss cheese, per the sign on the front. This is where the sweet stuff was made. It was stored and cured in the brick building shown to the left. The Liedrachs ran the cheese business, and since they were Swiss folks, the cheese automatically became Swiss. I presumed Amos Feisley, who lived nearby in the 20s, may have tasted this product, since he was Swiss, too, but I was mistaken. Amos told me he walked by the place going to the school in the brick grange building up the road a ways, but never tasted the homemade product. Well, if he didn't taste it, he must have smelled it as he passed by. In the lee, note the three cheese workers lined up in front with their arms crossed for a perfect picture. I believe the pic was taken by either Pearl Roscoe or one of the other early pros. Charlotte Rosin of Sanford Street gave me the photo which she got from Paul Ludlow, our local pro, But Paul must have found it someplace, for he wasn't snapping shots in Sycra 1905. Charlotte's maiden name was Wolfley, also Swiss, a family name I knew through my Aunt Emma McVean, who lived up on State Road at the First Ridge a long time ago. And so, these photos that come to light years later expose the true history of our local community, otherwise lost to oblivion. What fun it is to peek back into yesteryear and be surprised. Thanks to Ms. Rosin for her interest, and to Amos Feisley for his memories. Photos courtesy of Vermilion History Museum. It is a whale of a wood ship. The biggest ship to ever float its way into the Vermilion River was the Thomas Quail in 1920, when practically the whole town came down to view her immense bulk. Her bow was at the dock at the waterworks, as her stern lay off Tom Ball's shanty at the pier. Her two spars reached to the sky to the level of the town's flagpole tip. She was big. Why Vermilion Port? Well, the big barge, ex-schooner, came in for repair after bashing the pier in Toledo. Due to a shortage of shipping on the lakes from the ship drain caused by U-boats of World War I, anything that could carry cargo was pumped out and put to work. We still had a gaggle of ship carpenters in town, and they were hungry and willing to patch anything of wood. Most were tobacco-chewing and cussing raconteurs. But they were the tail end of the shipyard crew of the 1880s, and they knew how to work wooden ships. Of them I knew Jim Brooks and Pop Nichols and often listened to their ship talk. Their faces and characteristics still linger in my mind. In no time, it seemed, the 10-foot hole was patched and the old hull was caulked and painted. One personal incident I well recall was during a conversation we boys had at the dock with the old man who was going to take the Quail out. It took place while we watched two workers caulking the topsides. "When will the corkers be finished?" I innocently asked. The captain chuckled and rubbed my head. "You're the corker." The fun we had scampering aboard the Quail must have been reported by the watchman, because our rampages just about drove him batty. But isn't that what kids have done over the centuries? All aboard the nickel plate. Here is a cracked nickel plate, New York, Chicago, and St. Louis Railroad, now Norfolk and Western, passenger train running west near the present Ford plant about 1905. This loco is a 440 type sporting a high-stack, old-fashioned headlight reminiscent of oil lamp days, large steam dome, and sandbox atop the boiler, rolling fast to the Vermilion station on Mill Street. An old-timer to us, but a whiz-bang then. In the 40s, similar engines were still steaming on the Chicago-Buffalo passenger runs. I recall them reluctantly stopping at the station with the sizzling safety valve spouting a geyser skyward. I also remember getting off at the siding, where the school bus garage is today, and hiking home through the fields of clover. They only stopped at the siding when the fast freight was due. If not, then you got off at Lorraine. Photo from the Lingleback collection. Past and present water tanks, both on last legs. Here we have the old water tank at Hanover Square, Grand and Ferry Streets. In 1935, literally on her last legs, attired in white icicles growing from each corroded leak. The town was in a state of anxiety, hoping the old girl would hold up until the new tank on Water Street was finished. The old tank lasted a good 35 years in service and wasn't about to poop out overnight. The new welded tank has been in use 53 years to date, so we have made a substantial gain in tank life. The welding technique provides a leak-proof joint between plates, which stops slow seepage and its inevitable toil on the steel. I recall the man-made rain that often fell around the tank when the engineer at the waterworks let her overflow to water the grass. It was mostly due to their inaccurate gauges of the day. Many a hot baseball game was played in the shade of the Hanover tank by neighborhood boys. Among the pros of the 20s were Tom and Bill Williams, Dave Baumhart, Artie Copeland, Red Horton, Bob and Harold Rathbun, George and Fred Wakefield, and Hank Buell. We each had a glove we loved, and the games were pretty noisy, come to think of it. Trolleys were a way of life in the village. After the Hotel Modelton came the Lake Shore Electric Interurban Station. Ted Penny was the agent, ticket seller, and station master. Another fellow assisted, but I have forgotten his name. This station was where you bought your ticket for Cleveland and points west, as far as Detroit. The steel cars were fast, comfortable, and fun to ride. You felt like you were going lickety-split as the car zigged and zagged. The steel cars were built by the Niles Car Company of Niles, Ohio. The older wooden cars squeaked and squawked in time with the tracks. They were built in Cleveland at the Coleman Car Company. But the primary reason for the station was to house the two AC-DC converters that provide the trolley power for the cars. Cars need DC power at the wheels for quick startups and hill climbing, what AC motors lacked. The AC power came from the Avon power plant and came in the building at the 3 glass portholes at the south side of the building. They were still there the last time I looked. In the station, you could hear the converter worked harder when the eastbound car hit the hill at Vermilion Road. The station master could generally tell where cars were by listening. I learned this info from Herb Dozy, who was a station master on the Green Line that ran south of Vermilion. Herb was a real trolley buff. He could imitate the sound of the electric air compressors on the underside of the cars. That almost took a genius. I often pondered the inherent ability of these cars to stay on the tracks. They seemed to have magnetic wheels, for they swayed so much. So when the interurban came to our village, so did electricity. This is a story in itself and requires a future column when we'll light up the town for the first time ever. Electric lighting came to Vermilion in 1900. So, when the Lakeshore Electric Railroad came to town in 1900, so did electric lighting. It followed like the night the day. We didn't suspect it, but it came, and what a benefit. AC current was just right for electric lighting, and it transformed the face of America like nothing could. It was a natural. The town council took it before the body and finally decided the first thing to do was replace the oil street lights that Mr. Andrews took such excellent care of. He filled them with coal oil and trimmed the wicks every day and lit them every night. When they first came to town, they were a big improvement for walking around town at nighttime. One would walk from light to light, a big assist. They were like lighthouses. The council decided on the arc light, newly developed in Cleveland by Charles Brush. It consisted of a metal housing about 30 inches high, a hinged globe at the bottom. In the globe were the 2 electrode carbons that made the arc, or light, when the juice was turned on. Above the globe in the metal housing were the required auxiliaries to make the arc work. It was perhaps a transformer, a capacitor, and certain mechanism that made the craziest sounds when starting. I recall things chattering away, humming and stuttering as the arc flitted and sluggishly started. It was a question whether or not it would flash on. After the serviceman repaired the light, he usually threw 4 brass battery-like cylinders into the grass. These were choice finds for the kids who lingered in the twilight. Each light was hung between 2 poles at road intersections, and with a pulley at the light and one at the pole so the serviceman could easily lower the light. We kids often played under the lights and grew accustomed to their gruesome color of green. We liked the light, for it added to our playtime. The green arc lights were great attractions for the annual batch of Canadian soldiers, June bugs that invaded Vermilion in June. I recall Henry Schmoll, the street commissioner, filling a couple of loads of dead soldiers in his wagon to take to the fields for fertilizer in those fertile days. At the same time arc lights came to town, we were on our way to lighting in the houses and a complete electric age. They came so silently and were such a benefit that we didn't realize what was happening. Good things were just around the corner. Good drinking water with a piped system, sanitary sewers under our streets, better schools, and a host of other improvements to make our village a better place to live. Thanks to our mayors, the council, and the voters for what we have today. We can count our blessings if we want to. And you know what brought this all about? The chattering, stuttering, primitive arc light. Some afterthoughts. The simple filament lamp replaced the arc light. The arc went on to naval and aero searchlights where its pinpoint of concentrated light was supreme. Soon new light sources were discovered. Mercury and sodium took over the night tasks. In my father's notebook of 1924 is a short line. Neela Park has discovered a new sodium light source. Dean family dismantled Crystal Beach roller coaster. Some time ago, I received a couple of photos of the demise of our local fun extravaganza, Old Crystal Beach Park. What wonderful memories we have of the park. Norman Dean of Falston, Maryland has the story and provided 2 snaps to accompany. One shows the roller coaster coming down and the 2 fellows who salvaged it. This is a new yarn, never before told, so we are grateful to Norman for the details.
Public interest in the amusement park declined rapidly after the war years, and the property was sold to the Crystal Development Corporation in November 1962. Everything in the park was auctioned off by James Wagner of Amherst. This included a train, shooting gallery, funhouse, etc. We lived on the lakefront in Nokomis Park, right next to Crystal Beach until the late 40s. When the original roller rink arcade on the park's lakefront burned down in 1947, we had to hose down our house to keep it from burning too. The roller coaster had been built in 1924 of specially treated Georgia pine, 60-foot lengths with no knots whatsoever in its rather outstanding 200,000 board feet. The track was over 4/10 of a mile long and contained 20 tons of iron and steel. My dad, Francis J. Dean, bought all this and the 4-room cottage under it for $400, ending an era in November 1962. Naturally, several people had come prepared to pay a whole lot more, but Dad quickly pointed out the published terms of the auction, cash only, and pulled 8 $50 bills from his wallet. As I recall, the motor for the old coaster was nearly 6 feet in diameter. Dad sold it and the big chain for $900. Several engineering firms called to bid on tearing the coaster down. Terms allowed the buyer a year to remove it. Dad declined all offers, and he and my oldest brother, Jim, took it down section by section and sold off the lumber. The photo shows Dad and Jim standing on the very last section. Dad was a character from the get-go. He served 1 term as mayor of Vermilion on the Lake, and used to buzz the Vermilion Water Tower, roller coaster, and beach in his single-engine, red plane on celebratory occasions. Following Dad's death at age 80 in 1988, my brother Danny dispersed his ashes over the lake he loved.
Thanks, Norman, for a nice addition to the history of Vermilion. Norman has a doctorate and is associated with Earth-Space Sciences, another successful Vermilionite. Best wishes from the old hometown. The Village Doctor. Here is the former home of Dr. Reber Quigley, an MD who served the village for many years, from 1865 to 1910. This spacious home with a large porch was located at the corner of Liberty and Perry Streets, some 60 feet west of Perry. Another building appears to the left in the photo, hidden by the trees, and is somewhat of a mystery. Perhaps a reader can enlighten us on this. There is a sign in front of the large window facing Liberty Street that reads, Dr. Quigley, so I assume his office was at the doorway, truly an elaborate entry for an MD's office today. Around 1914, Charlie Trinter purchased the house and moved it south to where it stands today. This provided room on Liberty Street for the two houses there now, the original Kishman and Cohen houses. Next time you travel by this house, note the same large window is there with the ornamental leaded portion intact, the jewel of the facade, still facing Liberty Street. The doctor's entry has been replaced with a window, but it is the same Quigley home that served as the doctor's office for many years. The only living members of the family I know are Betty in Florida and Jim in Michigan. So, like in so many families, the grandchildren have scattered about the land, leaving a vestige of the family behind. Portrait of Dr. Quigley, courtesy of Vermilion History Museum. Three-family homestead. While on the subject of houses, here is the 1900 residence of Frank Horton Parsons, at the southwest corner of Huron and Decatur Streets, where Tom Williams lives today. Standing on the porch all dressed up for the photographer is Frank herself, hoping the kids stand still for a moment. At the back steps are four of the children, Cliff, Det, with Bob sitting on the walk. Mary has her buggy and dolly in hand nearby. Grace, Ming, is standing to the left of the tree playing croquet with sister Alice, Baldridge, in the shade. The other two girls are the Baumhart cousins. Note the wooden walks, the metal wagon near the walk, and the bike leaning against the tree. There is a lawn mower that hasn't been used for a while, and notice the fabric hammock on the porch, a rare device today. This house was built, after the original one burned down, by Dad Tischer in the 90s for $1,000 and still stands today near the northwest corner of Decatur and South Streets. So, this lot has witnessed the happiness and tribulations of three families, the Frank Parsons, the Cliff Parsons, and the Tom Williams. Who will follow? Today this house is owned by a granddaughter of Tom Williams. Civic Club forerunner of the Chamber. A big day in Vermilion Town for the Memorial Day Parade of 1930, with Bud Fisher at the wheel of Frank Baker's 1905 Roadster, doing his thing for the Vermilion Civic Club. When the Vermilion Boat Club ceased promoting the Harbor of Happiness theme in 1920, the Civic Club was formed, which ultimately gave birth to the current Chamber of Commerce. Chet Hodgson of the Old Lake Erie Power and Light Company, now the Ohio Edison Company, was then the town's spark plug, and he may even be seated beside the driver in the Ford. I cannot identify any others in the crowd. Perhaps one of the readers can.